On the night of December 3rd, 1971, the wind along the Soviet-Norwegian border screamed like something alive, dragging sheets of ice across the outpost fence and rattling loose metal panels as if trying to pry their secrets open. 742 were used to the noise. Winter along the Kola Peninsula had a way of swallowing human voices and spitting back only the sound of survival. But at 2:14 a.m., something broke through that familiar howl, a fractured burst of radio static that didn't match any known Soviet transmission pattern. It was brief. Just 3 seconds, a stuttering pulse like a heartbeat recorded on broken equipment. Then, silence returned. Corporal Alexei Morozov was the one who heard it. 26 years old, conscripted straight from a technical institute in Leningrad, he had a reputation among his fellow soldiers for being the one who listened too closely. To machines, to frequencies, to the mechanical rhythms others ignored. When the static hit his headset, he lowered his cigarette and frowned, not because it startled him, but because it didn't fit. And in the Soviet military, anything that didn't fit could get a man killed. He checked the frequency again. Nothing. Snow hammered the observation tower windows. The world outside was a blank sheet of white, except for the faint orange glow of perimeter lamps disappearing into the storm. Alexei should have logged the anomaly, reported it to the duty officer, allowed the system to digest it and move on. But something in that signal, a subtle dip at the tail end, a harmonic that shouldn't exist in cold air, felt intentional. At 2:21, he noticed something far more alarming. Post #3 wasn't responding. The routine check-in had passed 3 minutes ago. Private Oskin, a boy barely old enough to shave, should have answered by now. Alexei tried again. Static. No voice. No movement visible through the snow-blurred CCTV lens. Protocol dictated sending a patrol to investigate. Wake him. And Alexei would face questions he didn't want to answer about why he was monitoring forbidden frequencies in the first place. He grabbed his parka. When Alexei pushed through the tower door, the cold punched him in the lungs, and for a moment he tasted copper fear mixing with frost. Snow clung to his eyelashes, blurring the world into shifting ghosts. He moved toward post #3, guided only by memory and instinct. 20 meters. 40. 60. His boots sank into drifts up to his shins, and then he saw it. The rifle, leaning neatly against the post wall. The footprints leading away, not toward the station, not toward the barracks, but west, toward the invisible line that separated the Soviet Union from NATO territory. One set of prints. No struggle. No blood. Oskin hadn't been taken. Oskin had walked out. Alexei turned toward the storm, heart pounding with a realization colder than the winter air. Whatever that broken radio signal was, it wasn't a malfunction. It was a warning, and someone had acted on it. Someone young, terrified, and desperate enough to vanish into the night. But as Alexei stared into the blizzard, another possibility slipped through his thoughts like a knife. What if Oskin wasn't running from something? What if he was running to something? And what if the signal wasn't meant for him, but for Alexei? By the time Alexei reached the tree line, the storm had softened just enough for the world to regain its edges. The footprints continued west, spaced evenly, purposeful, not the staggering path of a boy panicking in sub-zero cold. These steps belonged to someone who knew exactly what he was doing and exactly where he was headed. Alexei crouched, brushing loose snow from one print, and felt his stomach tighten. The boot tread wasn't standard Soviet issue. Oskin's boots had a distinct diamond-patterned sole, stamped with a Leningrad factory mark. Not Oskin's. Someone else had been at post #3. someone wearing foreign boots, someone who had walked west. Fog of war settled into Alexei's thoughts. Nothing added up. If a NATO operative had crossed the border, they would never leave prints leading back toward Norway. No spy would be that reckless. Yet someone had been there. Someone who didn't belong. Someone whose presence coincided exactly with the broken radio signal. He scanned the tree shadows, every instinct sharpened to a needlepoint. The KGB drilled into soldiers a simple truth. If something feels off, assume it's deliberate. And right now, everything felt deliberate. Then he saw a disturbance beneath the snow, a faint depression running parallel to the footprints, a drag mark, like something long and heavy had been pulled across the surface. A cable. Alexei followed it with his gloved hand until he uncovered a thin wire, nearly invisible, coated to resist the cold. His pulse thudded. This wasn't a smuggler's tool or a hunter's snare. It was a signal line, the kind used for temporary antennas, field setups designed to transmit short bursts across miles without leaving a detectable signature. The kind used by spies on both sides. He kept tracing until he reached the base of a fir tree. Snow mounded around it. But underneath, he felt a shape metal, smooth, rectangular, a transmitter, portable, Western-built. Alexei froze. If he took this to his superiors, the KGB would descend within hours. And as the one who discovered it, he would be interrogated for days, because in the Soviet Union, finding a betrayal meant becoming a suspect in it. Thunder cracked above him, not from the sky, but from the loudspeakers mounted across the outpost perimeter. The station alarm. Someone had finally noticed post #3 was silent. The sound echoed across the frozen forest, rolling toward the border like a warning shot. Alexei stood up with the transmitter in his hands. And in that moment, snow swirling, alarm wailing, footprints pointing west, he understood the shape of the trap tightening around him. If he returned with the device, he would be accused of planting it. If he hid it, he would be accused of treason. If he left it, others would find it, and the question would become why he hadn't reported it first. The broken radio signal had not been random. It had been a door opening, not for Oskin, not for NATO, for him. Alexei turned toward the glowing outpost windows as the storm roared back to life. In the blizzard's brief lull, he thought he saw movement near the border, another silhouette, watching him, not NATO, KGB. And suddenly, the question wasn't who had crossed the border, it was who wanted him to. By the time Alexei reached the perimeter fence, the outpost no longer looked like a place he served. It looked like a place designed to swallow him whole. Lights glared violently through the storm. Silhouettes moved with hurried purpose, and two soldiers he barely recognized pulled him inside as if rescuing or arresting him. Inside the command hut, heat slammed into his face, smelling of diesel heaters and old wool. Captain Mikhailov stood at the center like a granite statue. Beside him were two men in dark coats, not wearing unit insignias. Their boots were spotless despite the blizzard outside. Their eyes were colder than the wind. KGB. Internal Directorate. Alexei felt his throat constrict. Mikhailov barked, "Report." But it wasn't really a request. It was a test. Alexei kept his voice steady. Post #3 radio failed. I investigated. The guard was gone. I found. He stopped. Because the KGB men leaned forward at the same time, like wolves catching a scent. Footprints, he finished. Leading west. One of the agents spoke softly. Only footprints? Fog of war wrapped around the room. If he mentioned the transmitter, he risked being accused of holding evidence. If he withheld it, they would accuse him of lying the moment someone else found it or claimed to. So he took a calculated risk. He told the truth, but not all of it. I found signs of equipment. Possibly, the agent said. The tone was silk, but the message was steel. Alexei forced himself to meet his eyes. The snow was covering it. Hard to be certain. A subtle look exchanged between the men. A silent conversation. Then, strip search him, one of them ordered. The room froze. Even Mikhailov looked startled. Alexei raised his hands slowly as two soldiers approached. They patted him down, checked his coat, searched every pocket. The transmitter was not there. He had buried it deep beneath a mound of snow before returning. When the search revealed nothing, the KGB agent shifted tactics. "Tell us again," he said, "but this time, as if you understand the consequences of lying to us." Something inside Alexei chilled. This wasn't about a missing guard. This wasn't about footprints. This was about him. Someone wanted him in this exact position. Isolated, vulnerable, framed between conflicting pieces of evidence no soldier could explain. Mikhailov stepped closer, face tight. "Alexei, did you desert your post?" "No." "Did you make contact with someone across the border?" "No." "Did you assist in the disappearance of Private Oskin?" "No." Each answer felt like stepping deeper into a minefield. The KGB agent lifted a hand, silencing the captain. "Then explain," he said calmly, "why you were the last man seen with him, and why your own footsteps were discovered circling the area where contact was made." Alexei's pulse pounded. His footsteps? He had never circled anything, unless someone wearing his boots, his size, his gait, someone building a narrative. And suddenly, the trap snapped fully into place in his mind. Oskin had not vanished. Oskin had been removed, and the replacement target was standing in this room, uniform soaked, heart pounding, future collapsing, one question at a time. The KGB agent leaned in. Voice barely above a whisper. "Tell us where you hid the device." Alexei stared at him, lungs tight, and realized the truth. They weren't searching for a spy. They were manufacturing one. They marched Alexei out of the command hut without a word, boots splashing through half-melted snow that hissed under the floodlights. No one looked at him, not the sentries, not the radio operators peeking through frosted windows, because everyone knew what it meant when KGB escorted a soldier alone at night. You were already guilty. The interrogation only decided the reason. The grey building at the outskirts of the outpost had always been there, unmarked. Most soldiers joked it stored potatoes. Others whispered it stored secrets. Tonight, Alexei learned which rumor had been closer to the truth. Inside, the air was stale and warm, smelling faintly of ink, metal, and something acidic he couldn't place. A single lamp hung from the ceiling, casting long shadows across the interrogation room, shadows that moved even when nothing else did. Only one man waited inside, not the two KGB officers from earlier. This one had no identifiable rank, no insignia, no expression. He wore a plain grey suit that matched the walls perfectly, as if he had been cut out of them. His hair was thinning, combed meticulously. His eyes looked like they had forgotten what daylight was. "Sit," the man said. It wasn't a command. It was inevitability. Alexei obeyed. The man slid a folder onto the table. Inside were photographs, dozens of them. Alexei inhaled sharply. They were surveillance shots, grainy, high-contrast images of him standing at post #3, carrying firewood behind the barracks, smoking alone near the fence line, walking back from the latrine. Normal moments, except the angles were wrong. They looked like they were taken from impossible distances, from vantage points inside restricted zones, through walls that shouldn't have been penetrated. Who took these? Alexei asked quietly. "We hoped you would tell us," the man said. The words were mild. Fog of war thickened. Alexei felt the ground shift again. He wasn't only being framed, he was being studied. "For the record," the man continued, "we know you found something at post #3. Alexei's breath caught. He had buried the transmitter under a drift of snow. "No one could have." "We recovered it," the man said. He placed the object onto the table. Not the transmitter Alexei had found, a different one. Bulkier, cruder, almost theatrical in how incriminating it looked. A prop designed to condemn someone too naive to know better. "This was discovered exactly where your footprints were," the man said. "Your prints circle the scene repeatedly." "That's impossible," Alexei said. "Or," the man interrupted gently, "you walked in circles because you were waiting for extraction." The accusation hit like a hammer. "This is absurd," Alexei said. "There's nothing I've done." The man leaned in. "Private Oskin has not been found. But we did find blood. Fresh. Near the western fence." Alexei froze. "What are you implying? That you eliminated your accomplice?" The man replied calmly. "When he attempted to defect alone." Alexei's vision tunneled. This wasn't interrogation. This was the construction of a narrative, one that tied up every loose end of a much larger breach. By pinning it all on him, the man in grey tapped the fake transmitter with one fingertip. "You are either a very skilled liar," he said, "or a very unremarkable pawn in someone else's game." He leaned back. "Which one depends entirely on your next answer." He slid a blank piece of paper toward Alexei. "Who recruited you?" There was only one correct answer, and it wasn't the truth. The weapon placed just out of reach. The man in the grey suit didn't move. The ticking of the wall clock stretched each second into something brittle and sharp. Outside, boots crunched in the snow. Voices rose and fell, distant and indifferent. Life continued at the outpost. Only this room was frozen in a different reality, one where a single sentence, written under duress. Alexei lifted the pen, turning it between his fingers. If he named someone real, they would vanish by morning. If he invented a name, they would torture him until he provided another. If he refused to speak, he'd be executed for treason. 3 doors, all locked. Unless the real target wasn't him at all. His mind rewound the last weeks, the power fluctuations, the scrambled radio bursts, the officers transferred out quietly, the nervous looks exchanged in hallways, and Private Oskin's disappearance. The outpost wasn't hunting a spy, they were containing a leak. A leak inside the KGB chain itself. And someone needed a scapegoat to bury the evidence. Alexei placed the pen down gently. He looked up. "You want a name?" he said softly. The man's eyebrows lifted by a millimeter. "Yes, I'll give you one. But I want a guarantee." A faint smile touched the interrogator's lips. "You are not in a position to negotiate." That was the first lie Alexei had heard all night that gave him hope. Because if they already had their story, they needed him to say it. They needed a name recorded, even a fabricated one, to close a file that was burning too hot. Alexei leaned forward, lowering his voice. "I know this wasn't Oskin," he whispered. "And it wasn't me. This, whatever it is, it's bigger than this outpost, bigger than either of us." The man in grey stilled. Alexei pressed on. "And I know you're under pressure too. Someone above you wants this done quietly, cleanly, before Moscow starts asking questions you can't answer." 1910. For the first time, a crack appeared in the man's expression. Alexei saw it, small but real, a flicker of uncertainty or fear. "Good. You want a name?" The man in grey didn't touch the paper. Fog thickened. Silence deepened. Then, the door opened abruptly. Another KGB officer stepped in. He whispered something into the interrogator's ear. The man in grey stiffened. His eyes sharpened. His lips tightened. And for the briefest moment, Alexei saw panic, not directed at him, directed elsewhere. Interview suspended. The man snapped. Escort the prisoner back. Alexei was hauled to his feet, but not before he saw the clipboard turn slightly in the man's hand. He saw the heading, Unauthorized Transmission Origin Confirmed. Not from post #3. Not from Oskin. Not from him. Somewhere else. Someone else. And suddenly, Alexei wasn't the hunted. He was the only witness left alive who knew the truth was unraveling. They dragged Alexei down the hallway fast enough that his boots barely touched the ground. The corridor, usually buzzing with the nightly shuffle of conscripts, was silent now, emptied as if someone had issued an unspoken evacuation order. Red emergency lamps washed everything in a sickly glow, turning faces into silhouettes and shadows into something alive. Whatever had been on that clipboard, it had detonated inside the hierarchy like a grenade. 2 guards shoved him into a holding room, a narrow space that smelled of metal filings and damp concrete. The bars slammed shut. They didn't chain him this time. They didn't speak to him. They simply left. Boots echoing away down the hall. He was alone, but not abandoned. Something was wrong. Alexei pressed his ear to the cold wall. Distant footsteps thundered in every direction. Doors opened, closed, opened again. Orders barked. Radios crackled, not with routine chatter, but frantic bursts. He caught fragments. Signal verified. No. Wrong. Quadrant. Check it again. If this leaks to Moscow, we're dead. And then, where is Sergeant Volkov? Where the hell is Volkov? Alexei froze. Volkov. His section chief. The man who had interrogated him 2 nights earlier. The man who had insisted Oskin acted alone. The man who was now missing. Alexei stepped back from the wall, pulse hammering. Every instinct honed through years of Soviet service screamed the same warning. This wasn't a witch hunt anymore. This was containment. Footsteps approached the controlled, heavy rhythm of someone who believed the building belonged to him. The bars of his cell vibrated as the man stopped outside. Colonel Sidorov, head of counterintelligence for the entire district. He didn't look at Alexei. Not at first. He simply stared through the bars at the far wall, as if weighing whether Alexei was worth the truth. Finally, he spoke. Do you know why you're still alive? Alexei stayed silent. Sidorov turned his head slightly, just enough for Alexei to see the tension around his eyes. We can't risk your execution, the colonel said coldly. Not until we understand why the Americans transmitted your identification code. The words punched the air out of Alexei's lungs. My what? Sidorov stepped closer. Your code? He held up the clipboard, the same one the grey-suited interrogator had reacted to. On it was a printed line in harsh block ink. Unauthorized radio burst encryption match. A. M. Petrov. 4th Border Guard Brigade. Alexei gripped the bars so hard, his knuckles whitened. That's impossible. I never. Of course you didn't. Sidorov's voice lowered. Someone crafted your signature and broadcast it across a military channel, triggering a national security alert. That is why you're still breathing. You are a variable we cannot yet eliminate. Fog of war enveloped everything now. Nothing fit. Nothing made sense. If someone inside the USSR had forged his code, it meant one of 2 things. Either a Soviet officer was framing him to bury something far bigger, or someone with access to Soviet encryption had defected. Sidorov studied him quietly before speaking again. What I want to know, Petrov, is this. Why would the Americans use your identification to signal us? What message were they sending? Alexei swallowed. There was only one answer, only one explanation that fit the panic rippling through the outpost. The Americans weren't signaling him. They were signaling the man hiding behind his identity, someone embedded so deeply inside the Soviet structure that the CIA had to risk a Cold War incident just to flush him into the open. And Alexei, ordinary, expendable, invisible Alexei, had just become the only clue to catching him. Sidorov leaned forward. If you know something, say it now. Alexei exhaled slowly. I don't know who he is, he said quietly, but he's not working for the USSR. Sidorov's jaw clenched. And neither, Alexei added, is he working against the Americans. I know the colonel stiffened. He's working for himself. Dawn 7. They moved Alexei before dawn, no explanation, no restraints, just 3 silent officers marching him across the frozen courtyard toward an administrative annex normally used only for high-level briefings. The building was dark, except for one lit room at the end of a polished hallway. No guards, no interrogators, just Sidorov, and a strange stillness that felt like the air before a detonation. He gestured for Alexei to sit. During the night, Sidorov began, we intercepted a second transmission. Alexei's heart kicked. It used the same encryption signature as the forged message. Sidorov continued. But this time, the pattern was unmistakably American. The CIA is speaking directly to us, and for reasons we still cannot fully understand, they are speaking through you. Its side. He slid the folder across the table. Inside was a single sheet containing 12 short lines, frequency, timestamp, pulse, interval. To anyone else, it was nothing. To Alexei, it was the same structure used in internal Soviet distress signals, except inverted. A mirror, a hook. Sidorov tapped the page with his gloved finger. Someone in our ranks, a highly placed individual, has been using your identification to move information across the border for months. We believe the Americans discovered him first. And now, instead of exposing him, they are baiting us. 9. Iman readed him amentig Backers 9. Alexei looked up. Why me? He whispered. Sidorov studied him in a way that no commanding officer had ever done. Not with suspicion, but with calculation. Because you were the weak link, he said. Invisible, replaceable, easy to borrow an identity from. Whoever is behind this assumed no one would look twice at you. He leaned closer. But they miscalculated. Because the Americans miscalculated. Because the moment your name appeared in a transmission, our machines flagged it. And the moment we detained you, he panicked. The colonel opened a second folder. Inside were photographs taken just hours earlier showing a burned-out car off a logging road near the forest edge. The metal frame was twisted, the interior charred, the license plate half-melted. Alexei's breath hitched. It was Volkov's car. He tried to run, Sidorov said. Someone shot him before he could leave Soviet territory. Someone who wanted him silenced before we could question him. The implication cracked through the room like a rifle report. This wasn't the CIA cleaning house. This was the KGB killing its own. To bury something neither side wanted spoken aloud. Fog of war. Inside, a fog of war. Sidorov closed the folder gently, almost respectfully. The Americans played us, he said. By forging your signal, they forced our traitor to move. They flushed him out without ever revealing their hand. They made us eliminate him for them. He paused. And they left you alive. That, Petrov, is not an accident. Alexei felt the floor shift beneath him, not physically, but existentially. He had been a pawn in a game he didn't even know was being played. A game whose rules were written by people who had never seen the inside of a barracks, never marched through snow on an empty stomach, never buried a friend whose death wouldn't be recorded anywhere. What happens now? Alexei asked quietly. Sidorov exhaled through his nose. You will be reassigned. Somewhere remote. Somewhere your name won't appear in any more transmissions. It is safer if the world forgets you exist. Alexei nodded slowly. And America? He asked. What will they do next? Sidorov gave a thin, reluctant smile. The smile of a man recognizing checkmate. They already did it, he said. They learned how our emergency codes work. They learned how fast we move, how far our reach extends, how we react when a traitor surfaces. They turned our own system into their intelligence tool. The colonel stood. In the end, Petrov, the Americans didn't need you to betray the USSR. He stepped toward the door. They just needed your name. Bernoded his with us. The room fell silent. Through the frosted window, the sky was beginning to lighten, thin streaks of pale morning cutting through the darkness. Indifferent to the ruins of the night before, Alexei remained seated, hands folded, breathing steady. He had not defected. He had not betrayed anyone. He had simply existed in the wrong place, at the wrong time. But in a war fought through signals, shadows, and silence, sometimes that was enough to change everything. Outside, a convoy engine rumbled to life, his transport to a place where no one would ever ask his name again. The USSR would erase him from the record. The CIA would never know they'd saved his life. And somewhere in Langley, a small note would be added to a classified file. Operation successful. Subject unaware. America had outsmarted the KGB, and Alexei Petrov, the soldier who betrayed no one, became the ghost whose identity shifted the balance of the Cold War without ever firing a shot.